Okay, guys, we are going to look at the mystery of Hanukah, the story of Hanukah and the Maccabees, and the mystery of Hanukah coded in Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 through 20. Now, those of you that are not used to this channel, what we're doing is something called deciphering or uncoding the scriptures. Simply what we do is you take a portion of scripture, for example, Matthew 24, and you compare that with other scriptures, in this case, Revelation, and you see a perfect alignment of what is spoken of in the prophecy, thus giving us more insight into what Christ is talking about in Matthew 24 to his disciples and what the Apostle John is describing us in Revelation. So, there's a portion of verses in Matthew 24, verses 15 through 20, okay, that are not as easily understood in the book of Revelation to the extent that they are understood in clearly the story of the Maccabean revolt and the story of Hanukah, okay? So even if you've been on this channel for a long time, we're going to go through this quickly, and I encourage you to get these notes. We have 4 pages of notes, and let's go very quickly and cover all this. All right. Matthew 24, in the beginning, his disciples ask him in private, when is the sign of your coming, or the parousia in the Greek, and the end of the world, the aeon, the end of the age, okay? This lines up with Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, which he will show his servants what will shortly come to pass, for the time is at hand. Okay, so the book of Revelation, Matthew 24, the prophecy is to the disciples, his servants. The majority of people will not understand. So take heed that no man deceive you. This is Matthew 24, verse 4. And we see the white horse, and him who on it has a bow and a crown. What is he overcoming? He's overcoming the deception. So take heed no man deceive you. The white horse, he's overcoming the deception. We have seal number 1. Okay, then we have wars or rumors of wars. We have a red horse, which will take peace from the earth, and he has a great sword. That's seal number 2. In Revelation, there will be famines. And he has there's a black horse, and he has scales, and he weighs the price. Okay, this is seal number 3. Then there will be pestilence. That's the pale horse. His name is Thanatos, and death follows him. Seal number 4. There will be earthquakes in diverse places, and in the 6th seal, there's a great earthquake. They will afflict and kill you, and you will be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Okay, they'll afflict you and kill you, and you see the souls cry out from under the altar in the 5th seal. These are called the beginning of sorrows, when the Lamb opens the seal, and the wrath of the Lamb. So clearly we can see that verses 4 through 8 are the time period of the seals in Revelation. Okay, so let's keep going. Then what it says, he says, endure to the end. He that endures to the end, the same will be saved. Matthew 24:13. All right, we find this in Revelation 14, verse 12. Here is the patience, or in the Greek, the endurance of the saints, and those that keep his commandments. So what happens is when you look at these, you get more insight into what Christ is saying in Matthew 24 by lining it up perfectly with the book of Revelation. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world for a witness' sake. Well, you see, the everlasting gospel. To preach to those that dwell on the earth, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of judgment is come. Worship him that made the heavens, the earth, the sea, the fountain of waters. Okay, is the everlasting gospel to preach to them that dwell on the earth. Revelation 14:6. And then, verse 21 in Matthew 24, there will be great tribulation on such that there's never been in a time like this. So, between verse 14 of the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the earth, and verse 21, there will be great tribulation. Verses 15 through 20 are not as easily seen in the book of Revelation. Okay? So the story and the uncoding of the prophecy, the uncoding of what Christ is saying there, we must find it elsewhere. We find it in the story of Hanukah and Maccabees, which we'll get to shortly. But let's keep going, because then Matthew 24 and Revelation begin to line up perfectly. Once again, once we get to verse 24, there'll be false Christs, false prophets. They'll show signs and wonders. So the false Christ, the Antichrist, the false prophet being revealed. We find in Revelation 13, the beast that comes from the sea. This is the little horn of Daniel 7. And the false prophet is the lamb that speaks as a dragon. Revelation 13, verses 1, 5, and 11. The beast that comes out of the sea. And the second beast that is the lamb that speaks as a dragon. Okay? Then, verse 29, after the tribulation of those days. So what happens is, we have this section here, which is found in Revelation 14 and 13. And then we come back to the seals. So in Matthew 24, verse 29, we have the tribulation of those days, which is the time period of the sixth seal. Okay, well, how do we know that? Well, we have clearly seen 11 clear descriptions in Matthew 24 to Revelation chapter 6 and 7. So let's look at them. After the tribulation of the days, the sun will be darkened. Well, there's the sixth seal is called the great day of the wrath of the Lamb. And it says in the sixth seal, the sun will become black as sackcloth. So that's the same as the sun being darkened. This is a solar eclipse. The moon will not give her light, and the moon became his blood. The stars will fall from heaven. The stars will fall from heaven. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in the clouds, and they will see the face of him, the face of the Lamb that sits upon the throne. And all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and they say, the kings of the earth and all of them say, fall on us, hide us from the face of him and from the throne of the Lamb. And he will gather his elect. Okay, when he gathers the elect, that's the seal on the servants' foreheads. He'll gather the elect from the four winds of heaven. Then you see 4 angels holding the 4 winds of the earth in Revelation 7:1. Learn the parable of the fig tree when the fig tree is shaken with a mighty wind. Okay, learn the parable of the fig tree. Summer is nigh, when the untimely figs or early summer figs. Okay, so that's summer here in Revelation chapter 6. And he will send his angels, and we see the 4 angels in the 4 corners of the earth. So we have clearly 11 different descriptions in Matthew 24. They are clearly seen in Revelation 6 and 7. Okay? And as we keep going, in Matthew 24, verse 43, watch him for all these things, because the coming of the Son of Man is like a thief. Okay? Well, this is what you see in Revelation 3:3 as well later on. Okay? If you won't watch, his coming is as a thief. He comes as a thief. Blessed is he that watches. Okay? So that's in Revelation 3:3 and Revelation 16, verse 15. Okay? Now, as we keep going, we see verse 45, blessed is that faithful and wise servant. So when the Lamb comes back, there are many with him that are called, chosen, and faithful. Revelation 17:14. Then we see the parable of the wise virgins. Matthew 25, verse 2. Well, those are the 144,000 which are virgins in Revelation 14:4. And, of course, verse 10 says, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went to the wedding. What is that? It's the wedding supper of the Lamb. Blessed are those that come to the wedding supper of the Lamb, because the wife has made herself ready unto the wedding supper of the Lamb. That's Revelation 19 and Matthew 24:15. He talks about reading the book of Daniel. Those that read, let them understand. And blessed are those that read the words of the prophecy. So what have we learned? Clearly, Matthew 24 lines up perfectly with the book of Revelation. Perfectly. All right? However, there are some portions, Matthew 24, verses 15 through 20, which are not as clearly identified in the book of Revelation as they are with the other verses of the prophecy. And let's look at what those verses say. When you see the abomination of desolate, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whosoever reads, okay, let him understand. Now, the image of the beast could be viewed as the abomination of desolation. Yes, that is what we can see in Revelation 13. But then it says, when you see the abomination spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand. Then it says, let them which are in Judea flee into the mountains. And then it says, let he which is in the housetop not come down and take anything from his house. Neither let him which is in the field return. Woe to them that are with child and those that with young wives that give suck in those days. Okay? And then it says, pray that your flight or your escape be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Okay, so where do we understand these verses? We find it in the mystery of the story of Hanukah. They are clearly identified. So, when it says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, this is talking about the book of Daniel, chapter 11, as well. It talks about it in Daniel chapter 8. So it's talking about the abomination of desolation. Now, this has multiple fulfillments. So we have one fulfillment that takes place between the time of the last prophets and the restoration of Jerusalem and the temple being rebuilt, okay? And then you have a number of centuries that go by before Christ comes, and we have the New Testament. Between that time, there's the story of Hanukah, which takes place around 168 BC. And it fulfills perfectly a type and shadow for us of Daniel 11 being fulfilled. So if we understand the prophecy, if we understand the story of Hanukah and the story of Maccabees and the Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes, we would apply that information to look for the coming of the Son of Man in the last days, okay? Because it's a type and shadow in Daniel. When Christ is talking about this, he's telling us about the prophecy. Well, look at it in the story of Hanukah, okay? In order to understand it for being fulfilled in the last days. Hopefully that makes sense. So, when he says the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel in the 1 Maccabees 1, verse 54, now on the 15th day of the 9th month, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar. All right, so what exactly is that? What it says is they set up an altar upon the altar, and they set up some kind of statue of Zeus, and they celebrated what we know to be today as Christmas, or the birthday of Mithra, or whatever the different gods are, all right? So that's why it takes place in this time of year, all right? And Christ said, pray that your flight be not in the winter. So the time period of the 9th month in the Hebrew calendar and the Enoch calendar is this time period we are now in. The month is the 15th day of the 9th month is around the beginning of December, okay? And they set up the abomination of desolation on the altar. Now, on the 25th day of the 9th month, they sacrificed upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God. So they placed an altar on top of God's altar, and that is what the abomination of desolation was. They clearly say what it is. And the sanctuary became desolate as a wilderness. Okay, so that took place. Now, this is also very significant. I'm going to mention this. I'm going to have to probably cover this later. But what happens right here, guys, is this is taking place after the daily sacrifice is taken away. The daily sacrifice is taken away. Let me get it. Let me get this. Okay. To where you can see it. Okay, so what it says in verse 20 of 1 Maccabees 1, in the 143rd year, they went up against Jerusalem and with a great multitude. Okay, and they entered into the sanctuary and they took the vessels. So they stopped the daily sacrifice in year 143. Okay, so we believe that's 168. And then it says, after 2 years were fully expired, the king sent the chief collector, the tribute in the cities of Judea, and they came to Jerusalem with a great multitude. So after those 2 years, then they set up the abomination that makes desolate. And that's what we were looking at here, okay? So when Christ talked about when you see the abomination that makes desolation, okay, that happens 2 years after the daily sacrifice was taken. So I'm just planting that as a seed. We'll talk about that in the future. All right, then it says in Matthew 24, verse 16, then let them which are in Judea flee into the mountains. All right, so obviously, when the Greek armies of the Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes, started to come, they circled Jerusalem. So the 1 Maccabees 1, verse 38, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. And they drove the Israelites into secret places wherever they could flee. And they fled into the mountains, leaving all in the city. In addition to that, in chapter 2, verse 28, they did flee, so that he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all that they ever had in the city. And certain men of Jerusalem and of the city of David were gone into the secret places in the wilderness. Okay? So when Christ is talking about fleeing, all right, when you see the abomination that makes desolate, when you begin to see these signs, it's not that it's necessary that we are in Judea. It's not necessary that these things actually happen there, because the beast in Revelation 13 is not only concerned with Jerusalem. Yes, he is, but the beast is over the whole earth, because he causes all, okay, not just those in Judea, to take the mark of the beast. The events of Revelation 13 take place over the whole earth. So we must understand that when these things begin to come to pass, it's like other stories in the Bible, okay? But now, we're going to uncode another important mystery of what it's talking about here with fleeing, Judea fleeing into the mountains, okay? And this has to do with a principle, okay? So some of what we can clearly see that the story of Hanukah is what Christ is talking about here, okay? But there's something else that happens that's coded, which is a very, very important principle. And that is, you can see I have it right here, there's no looking back, okay? There's no looking back. And when Christ says go, you don't come up with excuses. You say, you don't even ask how high, you just jump. So, let him which is upon his housetop not come down to take anything from his house. Okay, what's going on here? Now, this is a story, guys, not so much of literally being on your roof of your house. It's not what this is talking about. This is talking about a principle of war. Okay? So, if you go to Deuteronomy 20, we have the principles of war. And these are reasons not to go to war. Okay, so when it says, let him which is on his housetop, this is talking about the house. Because in Deuteronomy 25, is there any that has built a new house? Let him dedicate, or Hanukah. Let him dedicate Hanukah his house. Okay, so what that means is the man, it's like a draft for the military. Everybody has to go to war. It's time to fight. But these are exemptions from going to war. So if you built a new house, you don't go to war. Neither let him which is in the field return back. That's Matthew 24:18. Okay? And then what man has planted a vineyard? Let him return to his house. So in Deuteronomy 26, it's talking about planting a vineyard. So if you plant a vineyard, you're exempt from the war. Verse 7. And what man has betrothed a wife? Let him return home. So what do we have? We have the house. Okay, we have the house. We have the vineyard or the field. And we have the wife. So what is this? These are excuses. Okay, these are excuses for not going to war. And in fact, if we have time, I'm going to show you the next page of notes. Okay, that's another page of notes. We'll see how we're doing with time. We have to do a whole other video on this whole principle. Okay, so Christ is talking about this. The housetop. Okay, neither let him which is in the field. And woe to them that are with child. And to them, who's them? The wife. Okay, that gives suck in those days. So we have the same thing. You have the house, you have the field, and you have the wife. Okay? So those same things we find in the story of Maccabees. Maccabees 1, chapter 3, verse 56, let those that are building houses, let them return. Let those that are planting vineyards, let them return. Let those that have betrothed wives or that are fearful, let them return home and not go to war. All right? So, the other reason, this is definitely Maccabees that Christ is alluding to, okay, is woe to them that are with child and them that give suck in those days. So what happened is when Antiochus Epiphanes, when he came into Jerusalem, he was very evil, very wicked. And what he did is, let's read it here. And at which time, according to the king's commandment, they put to death certain women that circumcised their children. Okay, so that's why it's saying, woe to them that are with child. Okay, and to them that give suck in those days, because it's talking about circumcision during Hanukah. And they hanged the infants around their necks and rifled their houses and slew those that circumcised them. So that's what he's talking about. Woe to them that are with child, because those that are circumcising their children are being executed. The infants are executed and the mothers. Wow. So that's what that means. And then we come to verse 20. Pray that your flight or escape be not in winter. Okay? Well, we see in John chapter 10, verse 20, when Christ was in Jerusalem in the Feast of Dedication, called Hanukah, it was winter. Okay, so Hanukkah is winter. So again, when he's talking about winter, what he's talking about is the story of Hanukah. And Jesus walked into the temple, into Solomon's porch, okay, so he walked into Solomon's porch. What this is a portion of the temple. And in the same story, he said, I have other sheep, not of this palace. Okay, and this is the sheep palace. Okay, so Christ is spiritually preparing a place for the sheep palace. All right, and it's connected to Solomon's porch. That's a whole other subject, guys. We're not going to get into it. We're going to keep going. So Hanukkah is around the time of the winter solstice. So pray that your flight be not the winter. This is the winter solstice. Okay, and these events in Hanukkah took place on the 15th day, and then the feast was on the 25th day of the 9th month. Okay? So what is this? This is when they placed the abomination, the desolate, which was a Zeus statue, which is Santa and Christmas. Okay? All of that Santa stuff is Zeus. Okay? It's the abomination that makes desolate. It happens during this time of year. Then he says, pray that your escape be not on the Sabbath day. And again, they executed people for circumcising their children, and they went to war on the Sabbath day. Okay, 1 Maccabees 1:45, they forbid the burnt offerings and the sacrifices, or the daily sacrifice that we talked about, and the drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and feast days. Okay, so again, those that keep the Sabbath, keep the feast days, will endure heavy persecution again in the last days. And then so what happened is they said, we will not fight on the Sabbath day. So Maccabees 2, verse 34, they said, we will not come forth to fight, neither will we do the king's commandment to profane the Sabbath day. So they said, no, we're not going to fight on the Sabbath day. Antiochus Epiphanes attacked them specifically on the Sabbath day. But they said, no, we won't fight. We're going to rest on the Sabbath. Well, the Antiochus Epiphanes just wiped them out. So then they were wiped out. And so the king rose up against them in battle on the Sabbath and slew them with their wives and their children and their cattle to the number of 1,000 people. Okay, so they attacked them on the Sabbath day, but they're like, okay, well, we're not going to profane the Sabbath by fighting. But then they said, all right, we're all just going to die because they're going to kill us on the Sabbath, so we will defend ourselves on the Sabbath. Verse 41, at that time they decreed, saying, whosoever shall come to make battle with us on the Sabbath day, we will fight against them. Okay? So again, Pray that your escape be not on the Sabbath day. Clear, we see that in the story of Hanukah. Now, there we have covered Matthew, chapter 24, verses 15 through 20. But the same story is also seen in Luke 21. So in Luke 21, it says many of the same things, but it gives us one other important detail. And that's when it says, when you see Jerusalem encompassed with armies, then you know the desolation thereof draws nigh. So we also get the idea that Jerusalem will be encompassed with armies around the time of the abomination that makes desolate. Okay. Once again, we see Jerusalem encompassed with armies in the story of Maccabees 1:20, and then Antiochus in the 143rd year went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude and entered proudly into the sanctuary and took the vessels. And after 2 years were expired, okay, so so they took away the daily sacrifice, and then after 2 years, they set up the abomination that makes desolate. And after 2 years were fully expired, the king sent to the chief collector and tribute in the cities of Judah, and they came to Jerusalem with a great multitude. So again, they encompass Jerusalem. All right, we're doing well on time, so let's go to page 4 of our notes and go over the principle of the house, the field, the wife, and how this connects to the rapture and the wedding supper and the excuses for both. Okay, so as we identified before, when it was talking about the field, okay, he that's on the housetop, when it's talking about the vineyard, this is alluding to the story of excuses of those that go to war. Now, the same principle, now these are principle, guys. Don't look at it so much as literal things, okay? But what it is, it's basically there are things in this world that people hold on to, and they will not let go of the things of this world. When Christ comes, he says, forget everything in this world and flee into the mountains, okay? So this will either happen voluntarily or it will be forced upon us. So the choice is ours. We can forsake all, and as he said, sell all you have, give to the poor, take up your cross, and follow me. Inevitably, 99% of you will come up with different excuses, which are reasons you can't do that, which are clearly identified in these verses. But if you want to be in the rapture, if you want to be in the wedding supper, you have to obey this principle. There's no question. Now, the same story that we saw there in Matthew 24, we also find in Luke 17. So in Luke 17, even thus shall it be in the day of the Son of Man is revealed, apocalypto. So this is the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds. This is the rapture. Okay? Verse 31, in that day, he which shall be upon the housetop, in his stuff in his house, let him not come down to take it away. Okay, so now we have the house. And he that is in the field, let him likewise not, what? Return back. So we have the house, we have the field, and remember Lot's wife. Okay, so we have the house, we have the field, we have the wife. Okay, same things that we'll look at. What does this mean? Whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. That is the principle of the wedding supper, and that is the principle of the rapture, and the principle of the house, the field, the wife. Okay? And if you consider those things, Christ said, you cannot be my disciple. Okay? So then it continues with the same principle. And you see that in verse 34. In the night there shall be two in one bed. So the two in one bed relates to the wife, the one that just got married. One shall be taken, okay, in the rapture, and the other shall be left. Once again, verse 35, there will be two grinding at the same place. Okay, there are two types. Okay, there's the type that considers the things of this world, that says, no, I can't go to war. I have a house, I have a field, I have a wife. Okay? Those that have excuses, Okay? There will be one that will be taken and the other will be left. So we have the two grinding at the mill at the same place relates to the house. There will be two in the field. One is taken and the other is left. So we have the same thing. The wife, the house, and the field. These are the same excuses you see in the wedding supper when it says, come to the wedding supper. And they with one began to make excuse. The first said, I have bought a piece of ground. What is that? That's the field. Another said, I have bought 5 oxen. Okay, what are they doing? They're grinding at the house. Another said, I have married a wife. I cannot come. Okay, and so these are not accounted worthy to the wedding supper. And as we've detailed before, but now let's look at what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 5. What man is it that has built a house and has not dedicated it, or Hanukah, or where you get the word Hanukah? Let him go home and return. Let him not come to war. These are the excuses or the reasons not to go to war. And what man has planted a vineyard, which is a field? Let him go and return. What man has betrothed a wife? Let him go, let him return. What man is fearful and tender-hearted? Okay, so who is fearful? Who is afraid, okay, of going to war? Okay, they are not accounted worthy to go to war. They're not accounted worthy to the wedding supper. They're not accounted worthy for the rapture. And we see the same principle being instituted in the Maccabees in 1 Maccabees 3 verse 56. Those that were building houses or had betrothed wives or had planted vineyards or were fearful, those were commanded that they should return every man to his own house according to the law. So the law was what? Deuteronomy 20. In addition, in the second book of Maccabees, they were martyred for their faith, and they refused to obey the laws of the Antichrist because of their faith in the resurrection. They said, God will raise us up in the last days. And this same thing we see in Revelation throughout the book, but particularly Revelation chapter 12, verse 11, and they love not their lives unto death. So what have we learned? We learned that in the story of the Maccabees, it gives us clearly what Christ is talking about in his Olivet Discourse. And we have the understanding of what he's talking about by the events found in 1st and 2nd Maccabees of ways we must learn how to live in these last days. The understanding of the prophecy, of the abomination that makes desolate, of the daily sacrifice. So we'll have a series of videos on this, guys. We can clearly see the excuses to the wedding supper. We can clearly see the excuses for war. We can clearly see that when Christ is warning and admonishing about one is taken, the other is left. Okay, these principles, all right, we have them clearly explained and clearly understood, so the people know when he comes the reason why things take place the way they do. So guys, we're going to have more videos on Hanukah. This is a series of videos we're going to do on Hanukah. I really encourage you to watch some of the other videos. I will also have a vision I would like you to read from Dumitru Duduman. He had a vision that really outlines what we're talking about in this video when we're talking about going to war. Okay? I'll have a link in the description field to that vision. So just take the time and read it, and you'll clearly see what is going on when the people are being separated in regards to those that are willing to go to war against the beast and those who don't. You'll see in that the sword that we're showing you here as well. So I'll have a link in the description field for that very good vision. And as well, we'll have links to other videos on Hanukah, the things that we're watching. As well, let's see. Let's talk about this too. As well, when we see here, when it says the sun shall be dark and the moon shall not give her light. Well, yesterday was a lunar eclipse. That's talking about a lunar eclipse. And then 2 weeks later, we have a solar eclipse. I believe it's a full solar eclipse. So these are the different signs that Christ talked about. We're actually watching these signs take place. We're not giving rapture dates. We're watching, okay? So we're watching, and guys, thanks for watching this video. Please check out the links in the description field and watch and pray that you'll be accounted worthy to escape all these things. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.